So is trying to keep your home in a divorce for the sake of your kids until they graduate high school a good idea? Hi, I'm Gerald Maggio, Orange County divorce and family law attorney, and in this video I'm going to go through the things you need to think about in determining whether it makes sense for you to keep the marital home for the sake of your kids until, let's say, they graduate high school. You know, I oftentimes get clients that want to keep the marital home for the sake of their kids, for the sake of stability, so they have the same place to live and it's not as difficult for them to go through the divorce and so on. I fully understand where clients are coming from and the desire to want to try to do something like that. However, it requires really careful consideration of a number of things in order to determine, is that really in your best interest to do that? The first consideration is whether you can honestly afford to pay the expenses associated with the house going forward, and that includes the mortgage, property taxes, homeowners insurance, HOA dues, utilities of course, and maintenance costs. Things are going to break in the house from time to time. You're going to have to factor that into whether you can afford to do that. The second consideration is whether you can be able to buy out your spouse's interest in the house. He or she is likely entitled to one half of the community property interest in the equity in the home. In order to figure that out, you're going to have to get the house appraised. You're going to have to determine what the equity is. Then you're also going to have to likely get pre-qualified to figure out whether you can afford to pull out half the equity in that, increase your mortgage by that much, and be able to pay that on a monthly basis. The reason that this is likely a requirement is because your spouse is not going to want his or her name on the mortgage going forward when they're being bought out. And in order to do that, you generally have to refinance the mortgage into your own name to remove your spouse from the mortgage. In my opinion, it is always a good idea to get pre-qualified to see if you can even qualify to buy out your spouse out of the house. You also want to consider whether you can honestly afford to pay for the new mortgage without losing sleep every night. The difficulty with getting a pre-qualification or qualifying for a buyout altogether is that if you've been a stay-at-home parent, it's likely very difficult for you to qualify for a mortgage because you don't have any income. This is where child and spousal support orders are important to come into play. Most lenders will consider child and spousal support orders and payments as a form of income and can potentially qualify you for a mortgage. But in order to do that, you really need to have those orders in place for a minimum of 6 months, but a lot of lenders usually are going to require at least a year. A third thing you should look at and consider in trying to determine whether you want to keep the marital home is a capital gains tax issue. When you're married and you've lived in the home for 2 of the last 5 years, you're generally entitled to a tax exemption for capital gains for the first $500,000 above what you bought the house for in terms of how much is appreciated since you bought it. So let's say you've been able to buy out your spouse's interest in the home, you've got a new mortgage, he or she's off the mortgage, all is good. But then you decide later to buy a new property, what have you, and you need to sell your house. Well, you don't have $500,000 capital gains exemption anymore. It is now, because you're single, only $250,000. So you're gonna have to pay capital gains after $250,000 of federal tax exemption off the appreciation. The final and main consideration I always tell clients in this situation is you don't want to have a situation where you're house rich, cash poor. It is always my advice to clients that you really should have a balanced division of property at the end of the day in your divorce. And what that means is that you don't have all your money tied up in the house and you don't have any other money. You don't have any other assets. Let's say in order to qualify to make this work, you took all the equity in the house and you waived the corresponding interest in retirement accounts, in cash, other accounts, and so on. So you got all the money in the house, which you can't easily pull out of, and you really have no cash, or very little of it. Is that a good idea? In my opinion, no. So what I mean by that is you want to have kind of a balanced portfolio in the division of your property. You want to have a situation where you have some retirement accounts, some of which you might have gotten in the division of property, so you have retirement set aside for you. Especially if you've been a stay-at-home parent, stay-at-home mom, stay-at-home dad, and you don't have your retirement built up, you don't want to have a situation where you don't have some retirement here. Second thing is you want to have some cash. You want to have accounts divided up so you have some cash you can easily pull out for whatever necessities you got to cover. You do not want to be cash poor in this situation. And so that may require, honestly, to sell the house instead of trying to keep it for the sake of your kids, so that you can use that money, you can buy a smaller place, what have you, but you have a balanced situation. It's important to understand that if you can't work this out with your spouse and the court otherwise doesn't know what to do, the bottom line is that the court is going to order the house sold. That's the last case scenario. That's a last resort if you otherwise can't do it. So you have some options here. You should really carefully consider them, but you should be honest with yourself in terms of working out something that's not going to make you up at night, unable to sleep, worried about how you're going to pay expenses, and also so that you're not so tied up in the house that you have no other assets to cover anything, to live your life. I'm Gerald Maggio, Southern California divorce and family law attorney. If you know anybody going through a divorce, or you yourself are going through a divorce, feel free to contact us for a free consultation so we can give you recommendations and advice about taking the next step. If you like this video, please subscribe to our YouTube channel at the end of this video for more informative videos about divorce. See you next time.